begin by saying freedom looks good on you.
Yes.
I say that a lot to people. It's from a song by a group called Maverick City Music.
Yes.
It's a gospel group, and they say, and a lot of people, when I say that, they were like, look at me, trying to figure out what I just said. I said, try it on. That's the title. Freedom looks good on you, try it on. But welcome here today. I'm delighted to be here. I started Walk to Freedom about 5 years ago in honor of Martin Luther King. I walked from Selma to Memphis for MLK 50th. There was a community proposal that was put out by the National Civil Rights Museum, and I was trying to figure out how I could contribute, and I thought walking was the answer. That's what started the Montgomery bus movement. It was walking. Not everyone likes to walk or wants to walk, but it was what was healthy for us. Little did people know that during that time when they were walking, that they were actually improving their health and building a movement at the same time. So what I like to say is I'm walking to put the movement back into the civil rights movement. And so we're here today to commemorate Juneteenth. My other principal walking partner, Frank Thompson, cannot be with us today. He developed a lot of severe blisters on his feet during our walk, but he made it all the way to the Beltway of Houston, just inside the Beltway of Houston, like 4 miles to be exact. And he really wanted to be here today. So we're going to send him pictures. And when we get to Emancipation Park in Freemanstown, we're going to do a FaceTime with him so he can know who is here. He's originally from Fort Worth, Texas, and now lives in Kansas City. He's being represented today by his daughter, Anissa, who's videotaping there in the gray hat. And so we will remember him. Before I continue on, I also want to introduce Miss Naomi Carrier. And,
Good morning, everybody. Good morning.
She is one of the architects of the Emancipation National Historic Trail. It's a mouthful, but it's a wonderful title. And when I first learned about this trail, I was like, oh, that's what I need to add to my resume. I've been following Black Heritage Trails around the country for the last few years. In 2022, I finished a 700-mile journey tracing the footsteps of Harriet Tubman from Maryland to Canada, all the way to her home church in Ontario, St. Catherine, Ontario. And yesterday I felt the spirit of Harriet. I was on this roadway where there was just nothing but sun as far as the eye could see. And I said, Laura, can you please send me some shade? And 5 minutes later, I took a picture, and then 5 minutes later, this cloud was over me, and the whole road had turned gray. And I was like, thank you, Aunt Mary. Thank you. I know you're there. And so she's my spiritual guide. And I always pray to her for her blessings on these walks. So with that, I'll stop there. Let Naomi talk a little bit about the Emancipation Trail, how it came to be.
Thanks for hosting us, Michael.
Thank you, Naomi.
Here at the Ames Memorial Garden, which is one of the important sites on our Columbia Tap Trail, the railroad that used to run here. Well, in 2017, I was asked by the OSTL Redevelopment Authority to contribute to what could become the Emancipation National Historic Trail by doing some research. And so my first approach to that was to fly to Birmingham and rent a car and drive from Selma to Montgomery, because that is so far the only national historic trail that interprets African American history. And Barbara Taggart, who had been a friend of mine from the National Park Service, was nearby, so she is the one who worked with John Lewis to develop the Selma to Montgomery Trail, which took them 10 years. So if you just look at 2017 to now, we've been 7 years into trying to make the Galveston to Houston and Freemanstown a trail. And so it's still in the study phase. The legislation that was passed was really very narrow, from Galveston 51 miles to Houston. But during the 7 years that we've been researching this initiative, we find that there were more people going to Galveston than coming from Galveston. Number one, it was a very dangerous journey. Took a lot of courage and a lot of boldness of people who were supposed to be free to leave any place and go any place, because there was a lot of violence. I have completed a book on Reconstruction era Texas, and some of the research that I encountered was quite traumatic. So just imagine, if you want to decide to go on the Underground Railroad, that's what it was like if you were going to decide that you're going to leave the place where you were employed or enslaved to go to any place. However, one of the reasons why this trail is necessary is because, and I'll say, there are very few people who really know the story of Texas economic development. And that's the overall heading of everything that we're doing. It's Texas economic development, which required land, which required water, which required labor, and which required transportation. I mean, it's how the railroads were built when the rivers became unable to navigate the rivers, to transport the cotton and the sugar from the Brazos Colorado River Valley. And that's why this little railroad here is so important, because in the Brazos Colorado River Valley is some of the most fertile land on earth. The cotton gin was patented and enhanced by 1821 when Stephen F. Austin came to this area. His father had been invited to bring in colonists who died, and he took up his father's land grant from the Mexicans to bring 300 colonists into Texas. And so this became a cotton capital. Still is a cotton capital. You've heard the term cotton is king. How many of you heard the term cotton is king? Well, guess what sugar is? Queen.
Yes.
4 counties in the Brazos Valley, Brazoria, Fort Bend, Wharton, and Matagorda, were called the Texas Sugar Bowl. That's how much sugar was grown in the Brazos Valley. So one of the reasons why this trail is so necessary is because people don't know the story of Juneteenth. They don't know the story of how this economic development required so much enslaved labor. There was even a transatlantic slave trade to the Gulf Coast, via Cuba to the Gulf Coast. So anyway, those stories have not been told. People don't know that the last battle of the Civil War was fought in Cameron County, Texas at Palmito Ranch Battlefield. People don't know that there was Underground Railroad from Texas to Mexico. I mean, if you were enslaved in Texas and had the boldness to run away, why on earth would you take off to Canada? It just don't make sense, you know. Yeah, and you might not make it to Mexico, but because of the Callahan expedition in 1855, that story validates that at the time they decided, the Callahan people and his posse decided to go to Mexico, Nacimiento, to recover some of the enslaved. They estimated that there were about 5,000 people there who had made it. So my role as a storyteller, educator, historian, is to help people understand the Texas economic development history of Texas. What is that story? Why was Juneteenth late? Because of the cotton. It was 2.5 years late. Well, there were 2.5 crops that, you know, cotton was 60% of the gross domestic product in 1860. That's huge. The enslaved of the South were worth more in value as property than the banks, the railroads and the insurance company combined. These are the facts. We don't have to add to or take away from the facts. So our purpose here with the Friends of Columbia tab, with the OST, Alameda Redevelopment Authority, or TERS number 7, as it's known as a governmental entity, is to interpret the history, the story, to teach and to heal. We must heal. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't heal, throw that away and pick up something that does. And so that's the purpose of all my work, including the Mitchell Museum in Lavaca County. We just must tell the truth. And people will only respect and preserve what they love. But they will only love what they understand. And they will only understand what they are taught and given an opportunity to learn. I hope that was
Thank you. Yeah.
Naomi, before we pass it to Michael, could you just say a little bit more about when, how, and why this railroad was built before it became the trail?
Okay, well, the navigation by rivers was beginning to become more difficult, and not only that, there was more and more production. So beginning in 1854, the landowners in Brazoria County, which is south of here, decided to build this railroad to connect to Houston and tap into the railroad to Galveston, the port of Galveston, which was the largest cotton port in the world. If you don't remember anything else that I said, please remember that the port of Galveston was the largest cotton port in the world. And so the landowners impressed their enslaved to build the railroad. It took 2 years, from 1854 to 1856. This requires what is the easiest route, the flattest route, the smallest areas where you have to cross creeks. We're talking about chopping down trees. We're talking about dirt. We're talking about people getting killed. There were some railroads that owned slaves, that had their own population of enslaved. And a few years ago, I had an opportunity to participate in a South Central Texas Historical Association to talk about the building of the railroad from Texas to Mexico. And I said, if I don't go, nobody will know how important it was that the enslaved people built the railroad to haul the cotton that they also grew. And so this Columbia Tap Railroad was built expressly to haul the cotton and the sugar from the Brazos Valley to Houston and connect with the Houston railroad that went to Galveston. We're talking international commerce here. You know.
Dirt to shirt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
That's your phrase.
From dirt to shirt. We're also talking about how slavery was the cornerstone of capitalism. We're also talking about how the period of enslavement was what led to the Industrial Revolution. You know, from one level of technology to another. So from enslavement to Industrial Revolution to the age of information to the digital age to artificial intelligence. And so when you hear people say that the enslaved built the country, just go through and check how many courthouses they built, including the one in Austin, Texas. They made the bricks. They worked at the brickyard. They built the railroad. The railroad hauled the produce, be it cotton, sugar, rice, wheat, corn, whatever, you know. And so I think the most important thing that my work provides is context for enslavement, because we're not immigrants. Black people are not immigrants. They did not come here willingly because they wanted to, and I'm talking about you know, the period from, we could say 1619, certainly to 1819. And it was the production of cotton in the South that encouraged the domestic slave trade. First you had the transatlantic slave trade, which brought millions of people from Africa through the Caribbean to the Americas, first South America. And then after the patenting and improvement of the cotton gin, then there was a domestic slave trade from the upper South, talking about Virginia. My grandfather was born in Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, back down south into Texas in particular, as it was the furthest state west during the Civil War. Are there any questions? I like to make sure that when I give people information that I explain it as contextually as possible so that they don't have questions. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those. Yes, Felicia.
When you say that, are we working on creating a trail then, like an official trail?
Yes.
I mean, that will have markers, historical markers, and be paved, or have
That's an excellent question. The process is legislation to Congress and the Senate that then gets passed and approved to be under the auspices of the Department of Interior. And the Department of Interior provides oversight for the National Park Service.
Okay.
So then the National Park Service is doing the study to a feasibility study. Is this trail feasible? Did it happen? Where is it? Where's the footpath of the people? 51 miles, or is it even more miles, you know, from Galveston, which is why I'm so glad that Ken is doing that. About 3 years ago, we had an Emancipation Trail bike ride, which, you know, did the same thing, and of course, the way they traveled was more than 51 miles. But at one point, a couple of years ago, the leader of the study from the National Park Service, well, we have exhausted our efforts looking for a trail. I'm like, what efforts have you exhausted? What did you do? Where did you go? What did you learn? We have not exhausted our efforts looking for a trail. And we have documentation. This includes Brady Mora and about 12 of us who are historians, educators who've been doing research throughout this journey. We found people who made it, you know, but the majority of the people did not come from Galveston. They came from the Brazos Valley and all of the counties that surround Harris County. They heard about Freedmanstown. They want to go somewhere where they can exercise freedom. But understand, Juneteenth is a holiday. The Emancipation Proclamation is an announcement. It's not a law. So therein lies a conundrum when we're talking about freedom. Freedom to do what? When General Order Number 3 says, okay, you're free, but don't go anywhere. Well, what kind of freedom is that? You know. So our research and our documentation is simply meant to clarify the truths, you know, of American history per the African American experience. And I don't like to segregate history by calling it Black history. This is American history that is working to clarify Texas economic development. Thank you.
So 1985, November, the last train passed on these tracks. And at the time, Michael Lee was living here, and he remembers being in his second floor bathroom and being able to wave to the conductor going by. So after the railroad was decommissioned by Union Pacific, the city of Houston, eminent domain, took it over, and after a decade and a half, eventually turned it into a hike and bike trail. But during that intermediary period when it was vacant and defunct, Michael and his partner and his neighbors and friends, they created it into a beautiful respite and memorial garden for their friends who at the time in the 1980s were dying of AIDS. And so, Michael, can you just give us a little bit of a history about your work here?
Yes, said I moved here in about 1985, and in November I remember seeing the last train, so I witnessed that one. And then soon after that, they started tearing up the tracks, and so it became this abandoned wasteland. And it remained abandoned. The city didn't initiate condemnation until it became an AIDS garden, but for 20 years it sat vacant. And in that period of time, where those townhomes were, there was a fraternity house and several other houses over there. But these fraternities used to use it for a gun range. They use it for, shooting golf balls from their backyard over here. So I even found one and put it into a bird bath up there. And so this became a wasteland, parking for the fraternity houses. Found guns back there. This became a nuisance and a haven for anything that was loose was there. So I started the gardening, started closing it off, and started the process of doing laying the beds for the AIDS Memorial Garden, bringing dirt in, terracing, planting trees. And so what you see back there is not put by nature, it was all hand planted. The bald cypress trees, those are all planted. And so for 20 years it was that way until the city just went to condemnation. And actually, during the condemnation process, and in East Parker, their office declared it an illegal garden. And that's all documented. And so when they put the bicycle trail in, instead of the mayor coordinating with the plant material and all the things there, they just showed up one day with police officers and bulldozers and went right through it. So those are the facts. It's not pretty, but those are the facts. And so right now, the garden was started, like Ed said, is that I don't have any friends left from my 20s and 30s. They're all dead. And so I had some very inspirational friends. And one was an author, and he's included, I think, this garden in one of his books that he wrote. And he wasn't going to go and include the development of the AIDS garden, but he died before he was able to accomplish that. So, but anyway, now it's become, because of Ed and his volunteers with the Rotary clubs, it's kind of revived. For the 20-year periods when the city had it, I basically abandoned doing anything backwards. I had no idea what the city was going to do. The markers that were back there, the marker for the column was there. Those were all in storage for up until last year, because the city was probably my biggest nemesis with trying to preserve the AIDS Memorial Garden. So embracing it, they did everything possible to make sure it didn't happen. But
Until last year.
So last year, when Mayor Turner issued a proclamation in December, I think it was his last duty as a mayor, and then the Houston area Galveston Council issued an award. Scenic Houston, issued something. But anyway, so now it's on the books. So it's on its way to come.
All right.
So.
And the most recent update, last weekend, the City of Houston Department of Neighborhoods paid for a sign commemorating the garden. So when we walk, we'll see that sign. You should at least join us to see that sign, Naomi, because it's the same type of sign that we're going to do for Norris Roy CUNY at CUNY Homes. So
Right.
it was just installed last weekend. So we'll see that as we walk out.
But the ultimate plan is to create a plaza with the names of all the AIDS victims.
No.
And right now, I think there's about 4,000. in Texas that have died. And then again, that's going to require grant money, and Ed's in his leadership. I'm sure he can figure that one out eventually. And Marsha Dorsey Outlaw is designing the mosaics, which is the signage, which is actually 2 large 4-foot diameter spheres with the names on it. So those are actually going to be the signage, and that's on her work right there. And she's an incredible artist, very contextual. But anyway, the garden is there to be remembered and enjoyed, and when I'm back there working, you know, people stop and talk, which is very pleasant. They ask questions, you know. So I think the recent addition, which is a little contentious with the city right now, is that I've developed another bioswale. This is the biggest bioswale, and the intention is to plant 25 bald cypress trees back there in November from Trees for Houston, and also supplement it with some understory material, which is dwarf saw palmetto, which is part of the East Texas kind of landscape with large trees and the saw palmetto, you know, as a understory stuff. So anyway, but soon after the pond was developed, is what people referred to, is that duck showed up. And there's a family of ducks back there. And the herons that showed up. And then there was some other bird.
I saw a heron this morning when I walked in.
And also a purple gallinule, which you normally don't find in city limits. It's very shy, a very beautiful, colorful bird.
So anyway, so nature has a way of restoring itself. So and that's the intention, is to restore it and create an ecosystem. I don't think the city quite understands ecosystems yet, but they will eventually, because the main example is the one that I created 40 years ago with the bald cypress trees. You know, and the environment that's created, because you can see that when you go back there, you'll see that it's 20 degrees cooler than everywhere else along the trail.
And you'll feel it today.
And so that's the importance of these ecosystems, which don't take a lot of work. Well, but they do so much for generations to come. There was some quote that says old man plants trees not for himself but for the next generation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what the next bioswale is about.
Well, thank you, Michael, for doing this for all our generations.
Thank you.
All right, so Ken, I'll let you say any final word and launch the walk, and then we also have iced sun tea, dates, and water in the cooler for folks.
Yeah, the sun tea is remarkable. So so give it a test.
On the walk, I'll talk more about Walk to Freedom and places that I've traveled, and also about work that I've done in the AIDS field. My co-partner's not here. He was the deputy director of the Kansas City Health Department. Well, he's retired, and he also led the AIDS department there, and that's one of the reasons why he really wanted to be here today. And so I want to talk more. So let's get started.